gotta make sure I'm surrounded by yarn. Increase the likelihood. But now I'm also surrounded by cats. Cats highly motivated.
Okay, I am just making sure.
There's some feedback.
Okay, what I was trying to do was
Oh, sorry.
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. That was so weird.
Yeah, still doing the feedback.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sure can. No feedback.
Are you on? Do you have a device open that has like Facebook or YouTube open?
Playing? No. I was trying to see now if I could find the live, but it's not showing the yarn mission as being live.
Yeah, because I didn't. I'm not
Not yet.
on your. I don't have access to Yarn
Oh,
Mission.
right. Sorry. You said that. Let me go to yours.
Like you would just need to go to the event and
Yeah, I
share
didn't
the
see it
event to your page. The
right.
link to your page.
In the event, it didn't have like a clear live.
Yeah, it's on my
In the
on my business page.
It popped up.
Okay. And then I think why we're having feedback is because you have something open because I don't have anything happening different.
I had my phone on, but I didn't have our live open. I can.
I don't know. I don't know why we have feedback then because I don't know why we have feedback because otherwise I won't be able to. Can you hear me? I don't know what to do.
Do you want to try it while I'm muted?
Okay, okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I don't know what's happening. We did so good testing. It's doing that usher thing. You didn't see me do it too. Yeah, because last time, from what I could see, you were muted, but the audio was not. I don't know if like volumes were somehow different. And did you bring out the iPad?
Yeah, but it's not plugged into
Oh,
anything and nothing is open.
right, right.
I really don't know what to do. Um,
You want to do a different StreamYard? I don't know why it would be doing it, but I like to close and restart.
I don't know. I don't know. Because like I said, I'm working off of my laptop,
Hmm.
so I just don't know like why like
It's
there
getting
isn't anything else open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we can try to end it and come back.
Okay.
Maybe, but I should be able to be. Is it because I have two things that are live that's open?
Oh, because we did only test it with YouTube.
We only tested it with YouTube, but I wasn't live on both devices.
Oh,
But yes, I was. It's frustrating. Um, we can go out and
we
come back
didn't test
in.
it.
Huh?
We didn't test it this way, but maybe it'll let me share the videos.
Can you see share? You can? You can try. And what
You
I'll
shared
do
it
is
as a
I'll just,
slide, though?
huh?
You shared it as a slide?
Did I
I
share
thought
it
you
as a
said
slide?
slide earlier. You share screen.
Yeah, you share screen and then you hit you do share screen, and then share system audio, and then scroll over to the tab that you want to click for the audio.
Okay. Oh, wait, sorry. Let me see if I have Chrome.
Oh yeah, you do need Chrome.
Other things, the arguments that you make in your book is
It didn't tell me about the system.
What
I
do you
chose
mean?
like sound. It didn't say anything about sound. And you
Oh,
can see us. Can you?
mm-hmm. It didn't, there was a little tab, a little box on the side down at the bottom that should have said share audio when you were picking like which tab to pick.
Uh-huh. I'll try again. Maybe I have to. Okay, sorry, let me just try. Yeah, it doesn't have that, but maybe it's because my StreamYard isn't open in Chrome. Okay. But I could do that.
When you click on choose what to share, the box that says choose what to share, it should say something like entire screen window and then Microsoft or whatever tab at the top, across the top. And then to the left at the very bottom of that square, it should say like share audio.
Oh, mine says mute website notifications. But it
Oh,
says you have to do it from Chrome, and I'm wondering if maybe because I didn't I thought if I opened the links in Chrome, maybe it would do it, but it seems not. But I'm just gonna come back through. I'll be right back.
thank you for being here with us. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, but we will be right with you so that we can hop into the programming. Thank you for being patient with us.
Okay. Yeah, now it has a different thing. Okay. Let me see. Oh, yeah, look at that. Fancy, fancy. Oh, but sorry, let me try one more time.
Kitty.
Right. Okay, if I share a tab, it'll let me do it, but then I just have to reshare it from tab to tab. Because when I do window, it doesn't give me the audio option.
Yeah, yes, you have to go tab to tab.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, cool. Should I go ahead and play? Oh, you're gonna.
Well, let's see if it plays.
Tradition and what work is happening
Okay.
right now.
Okay, I heard it. Did you hear it?
I can hear it on my computer, so I don't know what it looks like out there
I
in the
was
world.
so confident. If there is somebody listening and watching us right now, if you could let us know in the comments if you heard the audio, that would be so helpful. Okay. Well, we're just gonna keep rolling. We're gonna roll like this is going the way it's supposed to go. Because I don't know. The only other thing that we could potentially do is maybe open up Facebook to see if it's going. Oh,
I
thank
think
you,
there's so much
Layla.
for Black feminists to reclaim in socialism.
Did y'all hear that audio? Okay. Thank you, Layla, for being here. All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sequoia Hayes. And what you all witnessed was just a little bit of technical difficulties, but thank you so much for being here. I love you too. And I am an artist and a therapist and a number of different things with my business, Red Linen Moon Wellness and Consulting. And we are here tonight to do a little bit of art making and also celebrate Black August. I am here with my wonderful friend, Kiana. And you want to introduce yourself and hop into the yarn mission a little bit?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kiana, she, her pronouns, and the Yarn Mission is an anti-racist knitting collective, and we knit for Black liberation. And so I'm really excited to just bring the way that we center art making, just general making, into radical movements for liberation, dreaming spaces, building spaces, literally creating things. So I'm excited.
Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge the land that I live and work on in Anchorage, Alaska, the Dena'ina land, and also here in Chicago. And also want to acknowledge where you are, Kiana.
Yes. I know there's, I wanted to make sure I had the proper.
Okay. Take your time.
And there's a kitty cat twitching
I
here.
really enjoy doing land acknowledgements, especially, during this time of year, to not only just acknowledge the ancestors, but also acknowledge, colonization of the spaces that we occupy, and the ancestors and the elders that came, before that time. And I feel like, during Black August, it's definitely just even more appropriate to acknowledge, you know, ancestral connections to spaces and places, and how we're currently occupying those places.
Yeah. So the Ute, the Arapaho, and the Cheyenne,
Thank
amongst
you.
other groups who definitely passed through the lands and held the land in great honor.
Okay. We are going to hop right into things. And so, what we're imagining is that we'll listen to a little bit of audio. Kiana and I kind of have some processing questions that we'll go through, and those can be offerings. You can add your kind of comments to that in the chat box if you like. You can also, journal on many of the reflection questions that we'll put up. Um, and yeah, and just make throughout this time while we all listen to interviews and also commentary. Tonight, we're going to center Charlene Carruthers, who is originally from Chicago and is just an amazing Black queer activist. She's an educator, and just so many other things. She recently won an award for a film that she made, and if I have it correctly, I believe the film is about Black women in housing, or the Black community and housing inequalities. And so definitely check that out. I believe the film is called The Funnel. And yeah, I really enjoy her perspective on things. She's also one of the founders of BYP 100. And yeah, Kiana, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, that sounds good. And yeah, it is the funnel. So that's
Okay, cool. Okay, well, we are going to hop right into our first kind of audio, and then we'll get into a little bit of reflection and then move on to the next. But as always, everything is an offering, whatever you feel comfortable with. You can take this time to knit, crochet, zine make. I have a little art piece that I'm working on, a coloring book page. So, or journal, whatever feels comfortable for you. Is there anything else you wanted to introduce for this particular segment, Kiana?
No. The kind of guide that has the reflections and such
Oh,
is
yeah.
I made a tiny URL, BA capital L for listening session. And the reflection prompts are really just as they strike you, if you want to look back on them and process through them in any way, just to help with our further engagement. But no, I'm excited. I have I have always this motive for kind of some of the ordering of things, but it's a me thing.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, I'm ready whenever you are.
Yes, let's see if I can. Okay.
So I think there's so much for Black feminists to reclaim in socialism, given our tradition and what work is happening right now.
Well, one of the things, the arguments that you make in your book is a defense of identity politics. So, and we're just talking now, the title of your book, Black Queer Feminist, we've just spoken of Rashida Tlaib as a Muslim woman, potentially the first one to enter Congress. Now, could you talk about why you think identity politics is important and needs to be defended, and also how it's come under attack by both members of both the Democratic and Republican parties, and in particular by Democrats following Trump's victory?
Yes. So in 2016, no less than 2 or 3 days or so, definitely less than a week after 45's victory and Hillary Clinton's defeat, there were articles by various liberals who once supported identity politics saying that identity politics were the reason why Hillary Clinton lost the election. They didn't point to all the other things that actually were in play here, but blaming identity politics. What they missed in 2016 and what people continue to miss is that identity politics are older than this country, and that white men, particularly slaveholders, other property owners, the Ku Klux Klan have always engaged in identity politics. The identity politics is when people connect their lived experiences, who they are, how they identify, to their values and the actions they take out in the world. And so white men have done that for centuries. Now, when we do it, when Black folks do it, brown folks do it, migrants, immigrants do it, LGBTQ folks do it, it's a problem. And so the identity politics that I work through are those that the Combahee River Collective talked about in 1977, which was a collective of Black feminists, including Black lesbians. And they talked about the place that they organized from. The best place for them to organize from was out of their own experiences and out of their identity. And they didn't stop short of saying, because I identify as this, I'm automatically radical. No, identity isn't enough. The politics, what are your values? What are the actions that you take to live out your values in the world? Those two combined, when they're grounded in, for me, radical Black feminism and also these radical Black LGBTQ movements and various movements across the world, those are the kind of identity politics that I believe in, not ones that actually seek to restrict the freedoms and the dignity of other people, but ones that actually give us more room and expand how we understand what it means to be a human being with our dignity.
Charlene Carruthers, one of the commitments you ask organizers to make is to combat liberalism through principled struggle.
Yes.
What is liberalism?
Yes.
What kind of world are you trying to create?
So when I talk about combating liberalism through principled struggle, it's a combination. Again, I said this book is going to get me in all kinds of trouble. Some of the stuff that I talk about, it comes from the Little Red Book from Mao Zedong, and talking about how in our movements that we oftentimes let things slide because someone is a friend, or we know something wrong is happening. We know that this thing is not the right thing, and we're silent. We don't say something. And when sometimes the principal struggle piece, which I also get from Antanya Lee, is one about when we struggle, when we have conflict, are we honest with each other? Are we straightforward? Are we direct? Do I pick up the phone and call you or the person who I know, a person that I know you're accountable to, right? Or do I just get on social media and say what I'm going to say, but we never have a direct conversation, or I never have a direct conversation with someone who you're accountable to because I don't feel safe talking to you in this moment. And so it's about how we show up, because I always go back to, and I talk about it in the book, I believe it was 1969, when two members of the Black Panther Party, Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, were shot and killed during a meeting after the COINTELPRO actually incited conflict between the two.
The FBI's counterintelligence program.
The FBI's counterintelligence program sent letters to the U.S. organization and the Black Panther Party saying that the respective organization was going to assassinate someone from the other organization. And they were,
so each one thought the other was going to assassinate him.
These were rumors. And unchecked rumors can lead to death. They can lead to death. And it's that serious, right? And they should still be here. That doesn't mean that organizations can't have conflict or disagreements.
Well, explain what happened in that case.
So in that case, when they died,
that they both died.
Yeah, they both died. And they were shot and killed in a meeting between the two organizations after this rumor had been spread by the federal government, by the FBI. And I don't want it to get to that state in our movement today. I don't want it to get to that point where someone actually loses their life. Someone's life is taken because we're not engaged in principled struggle with each other. And I'm not perfect. I want to be real clear. I'm not on some high horse, some person who always shows up principally in all situations. Principled struggle is that. It is struggle, right? And we have to create these containers where we are able to hold ourselves as individuals, and also containers where we create communities, where we can actually create real communities of care, where people can do self-work.
But what do you see as the failures of liberalism in that regard? Because people who defend it say that it does all that.
Oh yeah. So liberalism in a political context, when we're talking about government, political parties, it sounds good on face value. It's about equality, people having access to things, freedoms, all of that. The thing is, I know everyone's seen those graphics on the internet with like the little people with their arms up and they're standing at these different things. What I'm interested in is equity and justice. I'm not trying to just be equal to white men. It's a liberal idea for us to lean in. It's a liberal idea for us to just want to like become millionaires or become wealthy just like white men, right? That's not what I'm after. It's a liberal idea for us to not be really clear that we want nothing short of transformation, because liberalism is about tinkering around enough of the system and not actually getting at the root, as Ella Baker would talk about, and upending the system and turning it into something that actually improves our material needs, not just in the short term, but in the long term.
It's interesting, as we talk, there's a school strike happening throughout Washington state, and it's spreading even further. And among their demands are not just increased salary, but increased school funding and fighting inequality in the schools.
Yes. So I think that's super important. And it oftentimes takes folks being fed up enough, like really fed up. Something has to tip the scale for folks to take action and make demands that are bold demands, because our opponents are not afraid to make bold demands. Betsy DeVos is not afraid to make bold moves, bold demands. And so why are those of us on this side afraid to say we want fully funded education, public education, while we have other folks who are saying, actually, I want to dismantle this and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the things that I can do and within my power to dismantle this thing that you have. And so what liberalism tells us is that we want 10% of our schools to receive more funding, or 20% or 30% of our schools to receive more funding. What we actually need is to recognize the however many years of divestment, the inequities that the schools in Washington state have experienced, and not just equally fund them with the schools that haven't been divested from, but they likely need even more funding, more resources, more support, because they've been behind here, right? Or just below here, not receiving the kinds of resources that they need, while other folks are over here. So if we just get up, it's not just about getting here. It's about, it's a higher way, a longer way to go to get to where people want to get to and where we need to be.
Well, I want to ask about your own. You talked earlier.
It's so fascinating because it's like, well, one, she's talking about like accountability, right? And like accountability practices that we could have, especially in doing our community work. And I think you've heard me mention this, but like I've been really thinking a lot about what it means to be in community, which is like what I talk about a lot anyway. But like, what does it mean to be in community with people who aren't being in community with you? Right? Because accountability only works if you're all doing it. And so, it's really interesting and fascinating. And there's like a whole just conversation in there. Just thinking about that.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that reflection. She talked about principled struggle, and related to accountability, and if folks aren't being principled, and how that shows up, are you gonna jump on social media on Facebook and kind of run down what your issues are with me, or are you going to give me a call? And I think that that's really powerful, especially now, just related to the way we see that, from the celebrity, I think celebrity culture has a lot to do with that airing out of certain things on social media as a way to try to hold somebody accountable. More recently, we've seen like Neo, the singer, and his wife do that, and his wife talk about what happened with them, kind of publicly. And then you see that in community work where people talk about things online that you haven't had a conversation with them about, and it's a way to get the community riled up and potentially on this person's side that's airing that out. And it begs the question, is that accountability?
Right.
Is that transformative? Is that how relationships?
Right. It's like,
It's a lot.
well, people steadily calling it like calling out and calling in and stuff is like kind of how they like to talk about it. But we don't get to talk about, I'm currently in a big place where we're just not doing like power analyses. We're not talking about power in relation to stuff. And so then we're talking about these like different accountability practices without context, right? Like we're not talking about the ways that power imbalance can influence how someone would then approach conflict or harm, right? Like whatever level. And you can't have that conversation without it, right? Like, and because what you're noting is like stuff where folks have access, they could be having conversations, and we don't know what those blockages necessarily are, but you can envision various ways of routes, right? You'd come out when you don't have that access and when you don't have, like when there's that huge power imbalance and you need a bunch of you, right? So like you're calling out a corporation, sure, like hop on there, like blast it, like whatever, right? There's no courtesy needed for these like harmful institutions. But because we don't have those conversations, we sometimes really like skip elements of accountability, but still name it that, right? Like still call it that, without doing the kind of grimy hard work of like, you're gonna still be in community. What does it look like to move through then in that way, right? Like you're still like do you actually want this person not in the space at all? Like you can't see any way through. Or do you not want this person in your space right now? How do you like, what ways can we communicate about this in our spaces? And it's big. It's so big.
It's super big. It's super big. I'll add this last point and then we can hop into the next clip. But that a lot of this is also absolutely about power dynamics, and taking the time to create the space where you all can process, conflict and know how to do that with each other. Urgency pushes us to move forward and move through and get to, whatever the goal of the group is or the collective or whatever is bringing you all together, but really putting in the time to set up the processes that will be supportive when conflict happens, because to go into a situation thinking that conflict is not going to happen is just a recipe for something to just blow up, because it's absolutely going to happen. And so really slowing down and valuing the people that you have in community, in the collective, in the community, like whatever it is, enough to say, no, this is important. Our relationship building is a part of the work. It's a part of calling out this big corporation, our relationship, and being able to move through conflict when it happens, so that when we are calling out this corporation or whatever it is, we know how to navigate and support each other in those moments too, because that's important.
Absolutely. It's the relationships. We don't always put that work, setting that foundation, like you're saying, like you got to know what your accountability approach is. You needed to have named that, and like everyone opted into that. And then the discussion you released on urgency, I told you it's been sitting with me. It's been so loud in so many of the situations I've been moving through recently, and it just like struck me so much when I initially read it, because it just hadn't been something I thought about, right? And you were like, when we move like in sense of urgency, we hurt those most vulnerable, right? Like that's what gets dropped off. That's what doesn't get attention. Those people, those communities and groups and concerns. And I was like, I hope people will revisit that after this too. You might have to add it to the guide if I can figure out how to link it. Okay, let's see. It doesn't look the same as it did last time I shared, but it says it's shared. Okay.
Oh, look, it's always better.
You hear it?
Oh, we can't see it.
That's first.
Can't see it. Yeah, see, I see it lower, but I'm not sure why. So I go to share. I went to Chrome tab again. It's showing me a preview, but it's putting it like in my guest spot instead of up in our main spot for some reason. Like that's where I see it.
That's because I have to add it to the stream.
Oh, there's a bunch of extra steps, but this is working. Okay. Sequoia introduced me to this series, which is it's rerouted through the Smithsonian, the Museum of American History, National Museum of American History, and they're just rerouted into Black feminism and talk about it in different elements and bring in a variety of voices, and it's good. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. And so like this one, like, okay, I'm excited. And it just vibes so well with what we were just saying too, even though I listened to it first. Okay.
And foremost, it's like go, what does that proverb say? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
You're listening to Collected, a podcast project of Smithsonian's National Museum of American History.
I'm Dr. Crystal Moten, and my pronouns are she, her.
And my name is Dr. Crystal Klingenberg, and my pronouns are also she, her.
On this pilot season of Collected, we are rerouting Black feminism and placing it in its original historical context.
In this episode, we're talking about the term collective as an essential Black feminist concept.
Collective is community. It is all of us, every last one of us, being a part of a community that needs whatever it needs and working together to make sure that everyone's needs are being met and no one is being left behind or left out.
That was writer and social critic Feminista Jones. In her view, the word collective in this context is about the community, the group as a whole, and the larger shared experience. It's the founding principle of Black feminist thought. And with this idea of community comes the ability to take joint action together. Dr. Courtney Marshall, Associate Dean, English Professor, and Zumba instructor, gives us her take.
When I think about collective, I think about joint decision-making. I think about having rules and policies where everybody benefits.
The idea of a collective is thinking about the whole rather than disparate individual parts. The idea that we live in a community, that working together, we can all rise. Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, Black feminist writer, scholar, and poet, gives us her perspective and broadens the lens.
Collective is a form. It's a form of being. It is a movement beyond the individual scale. It is it's a way of organizing that comes out of the understanding that while capitalism would divide us into individual units of possible profitability, we actually exist interdependently, and we need each other, and we impact each other no matter what we do. So collective is a form that many Black feminist groups and other groups have taken on to really act on that and understand that we grow power by sharing power and by acknowledging the truth, which is that our power was already and will always be connected.
And so Dr. Gum sees the collective as both a way to see ourselves in relationship with others, and then also as a form, as a shape, as a way of being within groups. And I think that's what both Dr. Marshall and Dr. Gums are trying to illustrate. What is the shape that can be had and that organizations can take? And so collective and collectivity and thinking about the group and not only yourself is one way of thinking about that.
Yeah. And one thing that really sticks out to me is this question of power. So yes, we're in community with others, but if we decide that being in community is a formation we're going to lean into, who makes the decisions and how are we going to move forward? Part of what they're acquainting us with is that there is decision making across the group, that power is shared in this kind of configuration. And that's really important to the success of the collective.
Yeah. And in thinking about power, it's the decision to share power. Dr. Gum says power was already and will always be connected. In some other formations, there is power, but the decision is not made for the power to be shared equally among the members of the formation. And so when thinking about groups that call themselves a collective, it's really about how is that power distributed? And then what does that group use that power towards?
Our deciding to be a collective was hardly a unique decision during the time period. The people who were involved in Combahee, the people who formed Combahee, we had all had political experience in other movements. And we were also on the left.
We had the privilege of speaking with Barbara Smith, a founder of the Combahee River Collective, a group of queer Black feminist thinkers. They started meeting in the early 1970s in Boston, Massachusetts, and released a groundbreaking statement in 1977, which put into words the oppression and injustice faced by Black women. The group took its name from a local South Carolina river that was actually pronounced Combahee by the indigenous people of the area. The founding and early members of the Combahee River Collective included Barbara Smith, her sister Beverly Smith, Demita Frazier, Cheryl Clark, Akasha Hall, Margot Okazawa Ray, Charlene McRae, and Audre Lorde.
I was thinking like, well, instead of us naming ourselves after a person, why don't we name ourselves after an action? Because we're about action. At least we want to be. We want to be. And that's how Combahee came to exist. I had read a short, very short biography, less than 100 pages, if that, about Harriet Tubman that was published by a radical publisher. I think it was International Publishers. And so they had a little biography, and I remember it was green because green is my favorite color. And his little green book. And in this book about Harriet Tubman, because I did not know a huge amount about her. Anyway, in that little book, it described the raid on the Combahee River. And I was like, what? Oh my God. This Black woman, formerly enslaved, was a scout for the Union Army, and she helped to plan and execute this action on the Combahee River in South Carolina that freed over 750 Africans. And I was like, okay, I love that.
So hearing Barbara Smith talk about the origins of Combahee is so important, especially when we think about the 1970s. We know some well-known people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, but lesser known people who were engaged in activism and who were moving and organizing at the center of race and gender and sexuality deserve to be recognized. And so Barbara Smith, she's in the middle of all of this. And she and the other members of Combahee come together to form this organization.
But Barbara Smith isn't just important for Combahee. She was doing more than that, and she's continuing to do more than that. So she's also a writer, a teacher, a professor. So at once she's organizing with Combahee, but she's also teaching English literature. And she's one of the people who helped more Black women publish their work. And, part of how she does this is by going on to form a press, Kitchen Table Press, which publishes the words of Black women writers, people like Audre Lorde. And then there's also Combahee. So she's doing a variety of kinds of work that speak to her Black feminism and her activism. And it's not just Combahee.
So coming back to the historical period of the 1970s, there was a lot going on at the time. There was a continuing movement for racial justice, which found its form in terms of Black power and Black nationalism. But we also know there was a continuing movement for women's equality that really found its form in national organizations. There were so many groups working and engaged in struggles around racial equality, women's liberation, and the fight for gay and queer rights. And some of these groups, members of the Combahee River Collective, were already involved in. They were already organizing, and they joined together to create change in these very important areas.
So this was a particularly fertile time for the development of this kind of organization on the left.
Right. But even in this environment of so much activism happening, speaking up and out could really result in physical violence. And so many people were active, but it was also tremendously dangerous to be out and active, fighting for Black equality, gay rights, gender justice, or whichever cause you found yourself involved in.
And the women of Combahee took a stand. Here's Barbara Smith again.
What do you think it was like to be out as a Black lesbian less than a decade after Stonewall and to be political? Oh, it was not fun. It was not fun. It was fun internally for us because we had found our community. We did things that kept our spirits alive and that nurtured our souls. So we had been involved, one of our members, Demeter Frazier, had been involved with the Panthers in Chicago. I was involved in the civil rights movement.
You know, there were a variety of organizations that were working towards some kind of civil rights or social change at the moment that Combahee comes together. But why did the founders of Combahee feel the need for another organization? I mean, they were already participating in these other groups.
That's true, but they needed an organization that met their needs. Some civil rights and Black power organizations were sexist to women members. Women's rights organizations were an option, but they silenced Black women's voices. And there were other Black women's organizations at the time, but as lesbians, the early members of Combahee faced rejection there as well. And so all of these experiences together compelled them to create Combahee.
In talking with Smith about the origin of Combahee, she recalled that the structure of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, served as a model for the new organization. SNCC was one of the most important civil rights organizations of the 1960s, and it was led by youth.
SNCC was a perfect example of an organization that was democratic and not top down. At least it had that ethos. And even though it had executive directors and staff, etc., they were a grassroots organization.
And they took that model and folded it into Combahee's structure.
We also talked to Dr. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University and author of How We Get Free, an oral history of the Combahee River Collective, which was published on the 40th anniversary of the collective's statement.
I think that they wanted to model something different, that they wanted to model what we today call horizontalism, right? Where there is a kind of mutual agreement that the organization is collectively possessed and we make decisions on the basis of consensus. We function without hierarchy and that we all take responsibility for the practices and for the guidance and direction of the movement.
Collaborative decision-making that centered the needs of the community was a critical element that made the collective a strong political formation. Dr. Taylor spoke about the significance of the collective in a broader political sense and what that structure said about Black feminist politics.
But what, to me, systematically might be to overstate it, but that is regularly left out of this kind of celebration of Combahee is not only were these women anti-capitalist, but they were socialist. And they said forthrightly, we are socialists.
Combahee members identified as socialist in opposition to capitalism. In capitalism, private ownership of resources and the means of production is the norm. In socialism, public ownership and resources and the means of production is the norm. Dr. Taylor continues.
And when I interviewed Barbara Smith for the book, she says that it is the fact that we are socialists that gives the statement itself its edge and that makes it powerful, that it is not just a kind of personal reflection on, an individual experience unto itself, but it's looking at these experiences of Black women and analyzing them and coming to political conclusions about why those experiences exist and locating them in the system of capitalism. And that is part of the power of the document and part of the power of their political analysis.
This comes directly from the Combahee Statement as read by Faith Davis Ruffins, curator of African American History and Culture and member of the African American History Curatorial Collective at the National Museum of American History.
We are socialists because we believe that work must be organized for the collective benefit of those who do the work and create the products, and not for the profit of the bosses. Material resources must be equally distributed among those who create these resources.
Members of the collective were socialists. In their understanding of socialism, material resources should be equally distributed among those who created those resources, the workers. It's important to consider how that influenced and affected their overall politics. And it brings to light that this really was about what Black women were experiencing materially, what they were experiencing financially, and what they were experiencing in the job market.
That's right. That's right. And so what Dr. Taylor is illuminating is that we can't take one part of the collective and leave the others. When we're trying to understand what causes them to form themselves and what they're speaking out against, it's not just gender injustice. It's not just racial injustice, but it's the injustice they felt at the intersection of their race, class, gender, and sexuality.
I think it's worth noting that there continues to be this tension between feminism and capitalism, right? So that this like excessive consumption and attainment of massive wealth by a few, like these are signals of contemporary success for Black women and femmes in capitalism. And we see, in some of the kind of like girl boss mentality, right? We see Black women succeeding. We see Black women in power. We see Black women doing things that their ancestors, their foremothers could never have even conceived. But simultaneously, that success has not resulted in the liberation of all Black women, which is the goal of Black feminism, right? So here we see this tension between, what does it mean to be a feminist today, and how does that line up against critiques of capitalism, or does it?
I mean, there's this sense that, being a billionaire, that could be a problem, right? Yes, there's representation in terms of wealth and Black women attaining those signs and signatures of wealth, but there still remains that there are a vast number of Black women, right, who are impoverished, who don't have access to education, who are struggling for reproductive autonomy and justice, right? And so it's the question arises, can you be a Black feminist and a billionaire, right?
What? I was like, oh, get him. So I had to just a little pause. It's like the conversations that I just really want to be having. Whew, Black capitalism has been loud lately.
While I was listening to that one and kind of revisiting the first time that I had listened to that, I was just thinking about how have a lot of these themes like influenced the art, that I do, and just my creative process really. Like how does this influence, inform, impact my creative process, and it's always thinking about or it's always kind of centering, if you will, like we were just talking about, that resistance to urgency, because in the second one, what I feel like a lot of this, what is the collective, is really centered around like, what's my purpose, what's my mission, and how can I be in spaces with folks and imagine that together. How can we, as they say, build the plane as we're flying and not harm each other?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, capitalism gets into that.
Ooh, it does. It just
Mhm.
so, it very much does. One of the things I really love is I've been thinking about, you know, so I deal in like abolition a lot, right? Like talking about those things. And
Mhm.
for abolition and kind of like any anti-capitalism, people are just like, oh, well, what's pragmatic and what makes sense? And, you know, as if there hasn't been like a huge history of people talking about these things and huge frameworks, right? Like you just got socialism, right? And we get to see it in cooperative economics and communal thriving and surviving and stuff.
Mhm.
But like there's all kinds of things that people overlook just to be able to like stick with the status quo kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so like it's so interesting. And I guess, you know, it's kind of like I think we all navigate in ways that make sense for us and like who we can build with, right? Like, and what that looks like at different stages. Because I'm very much like, I want to build with the folks I know are where I am. And I want to grow with the folks that are already close, right? That want to lean in. And I don't move in a way that like draws me to like be recruiting people from
Mhm.
out, like way
Mhm.
out, right? Like I kind of stay in this like closer realm in the terms of how I think about space building and dream building. And there are folks that do other types of work out there that I see value in, right? But it's like, what does all that, like, what can it look like? I think it's thinking about the plane. I think sometimes people get hurt, you know? And ideally, those are, to me, that's kind of where you start then, right? Like, here's what hurt looks like, right?
Yeah.
Here's the
Yeah.
things that I can easily foresee. And here's like, let's talk about that now. Let's talk about that ahead of time. And I think people struggle with it sometimes, like even just wanting to have the conversations. It's like,
Definitely.
maybe because we move so much in like a, if you speak it, it'll come kind of thing. But like we move through like so much hurt that, I mean, we just gotta assume it's right there.
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and go ahead and lay out those foundations. That's how I feel and think about it. But it has a lot to do again with whether or not folks are opting into that
Mhm.
when they're
Yeah.
building spaces. And because it's hard if you don't have those conversations, hurt happens, and then you want to have them, then people are opting in and out, right? And that people are always going to be able to do that, but like laying that foundation, I think, I mean, it's an important step to
It's
trying to
so
make sure that
important.
you knew the agreement, you knew what was going on, what the relationship is.
It's so important. It's so important, you know, and I think too that last question about can you be a Black feminist and, you know,
Millionaire.
and a millionaire, billionaire, you know, I think even about what you were just saying, I feel like yes, and in movement, collective spaces, like what needs to happen in both of those scenarios is consistent checks and balances. So you need to constantly be doing like your own personal work. You need to constantly be doing like power dynamics checks, and not constantly, but just like quarterly, annually, you know, like be checking in with these things, you know, like I think that you can, but you have to keep, like, you have to be disciplined or aware of like actively moving in the value of, I have to be checking my power. I need to be checking my privilege. I need to be, you know, like navigating certain like personal, you know, working on myself related to trauma and blah, blah, you know, like you have to actively be doing those things because when you're not doing those things, then that means that it's happening, you know? So yeah, I think you can be a Black feminist and a millionaire or a billionaire, but I feel like you also have to be principled.
The accumulation of wealth is hard for me. It is like, it's hard for me to envision a path to having that wealth that didn't include you kind of choosing the wealth, right? And yet, you know, we are all on journeys. I think I'm more in the place where, like, I feel like you can be redeemed in, but to be able to have and hold wealth that large, it's challenging. But that's also, I don't know where my level is. You know, sometimes I think about it, I'm like, you know, because why can't we can give people what they need to make it? Ideally, we would just like not deal in money, right? Like that's a mediator for stuff that we don't inherently need. It's a way to make sure some people have and don't, and in unequal amounts, and we could just be distributing what folks need, and you know that and things like that. But if we're still in this kind of income and we're thinking maybe base incomes, like I'm not sure. I don't know where it is.
Yeah. I love this. Let's see. Oh, this comment from Layla. She says, I don't know. I think there are some power dynamics that are inevitable and unchangeable. And in those cases, doing your self-work is the best we can do, but wealth is something you can change, can redistribute. Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think part of that work that a person would be doing for me, it inevitably ends in you not keeping that wealth, right? Like it's got to be cycling, it's got to be moving, it's got to be working out there.
And that's a value, right? Like that redistribution, that's a value.
Yes, exactly. And yes, it's like that's a value, and that's a praxis that like matters for me, right? That like is part of how I navigate and think of spaces. So I didn't include it was in the first episode of the series, I think, in someone who was maybe Paris with Black Feminist Futures was named Black Feminisms, right? Because really there's like, just like everything, it's expansive. There's lots of us. We have lots of approaches and thoughts. I do think that the power dynamics are intimately related to the accumulation of wealth, and that's like, you can't win capitalism and then, you know, be willing to like kind of you tie in. But spoiler, I feel this way about like government politics pretty strongly too. It's that, it's so interesting. And yet, I think to exclude people from our community who are still wanting to do this work and like trying to learn and do this work, I think it's a glass house. I think we'd be throwing stones from a glass house. I think that we've got a lot of unpacking and working to do. That one's easy and obvious to me, but you know, that's like when I'm talking about the zone of work I do, that person, if they're willing to have conversations, like that person's in my realm, right? Like I'm good. And like for that conversation to be reciprocal makes a lot of sense to me.
I love this conversation.
I was like,
it's so important. It's so important. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I've been watching it because a lot of what's been coming out is so much like Black economic building, not around survival and not around cooperation, not around that communal, still like building in, right, these elements of oppression. Like I'm just trying to have conversations about how like there are no legitimate systems of merit in this construct in history that we come up in, and folks are still really ingrained, like digging into like you get what you work for, right? Like if I hear another person say we all got the same amount of hours in a day, ooh. Like I just feel like we've been having these conversations. But yet again.
Yes, yeah, it's really frustrating, you know, especially just given what we've seen just over the panini, you know, like that's not helpful, that's not inclusive, it's not supportive, you know. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it's good to be able to speak on it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's and at this interesting place where like, you know, things are shifting, mostly like policies and practices, less so behaviors and actual risk, but things are shifting, and when Charlene is saying that we like over here doing in this area, and I think we do make a lot of bold demands. I think we do dream big, but I think that those who tend to represent us, especially when we're thinking about politics, they're not where we are, right? Their big dreams are not our big dreams. And to be able to make it through these realms, you've been able to like temper and pace, right? And they're in temper, so then you're pacing to something different.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, we're not like, now we see things that should have been like, oh, look, we could have been doing this already. Now it's like not a thing already. Like we didn't even have a full conversation about it, right? But like all of a sudden we had like, there was little snips here, like accessibility, like look at that, we could have been doing this, and it's like, nah, right? I'm like, okay, guess we'll just keep on, keep on keeping on, I guess. Oh, it's
a lot. It's a lot, you know, and I feel like that all ties back into urgency, you know, and white supremacy culture and so on and so forth, you know, and ultimately capitalism.
Right.
So,
that's where that one gets me every time.
So we're really supposed to be ending like now. So should we listen to one more, or what do you think?
If you have a minute, we could just close out with Charlene again.
Okay.
It's like 5 minutes. And, and folks, like, maybe we'll revisit some of the Rerooted for our listening session on the 21st. But it is available. You can listen to whatever. You can listen to the rest of that episode.
And I think it's 6. I think it's either 5 or 6 of those Rerooted episodes, and I really like the way that they did the interviews. It's very interactive, and just some good nuggets.
It's just lovely, lovely, and like just folks I really want to listen to like a lot.
Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Okay, we're gonna do one more for 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay,
and I've been crocheting.
Oh, nice. I
continued it.
Nice. I love that. I had switched from my coloring book page to journaling, so I'm just journaling.
I love it.
Just journaling what's coming up.
And I wrote on our if folks visit the guide, I was like kind of trying to explain, because people always like, well, how is knitting radical? And we're not gonna go into it today, but I got like a whole spiel, right?
I would love that. Yeah, that would be fun to talk about. Yes, it is.
It's a whole thing. And you'll have to add it to the sharing again.
Okay.
But the ways that we channel our art in spaces, like, it's always there. And what I was writing is that sometimes it's something that we do intentionally, right? Like I might choose different colors or different textures, but it also just like little choices that you make or little things that your body does. So like when you're knitting, you got a natural tension, and crocheting, right? Brush strokes, if we're thinking about painting and stuff, and maybe pressure when you're thinking about ink and marker work, which I guess is ink work, whatever. But those things you might not always be conscious about, but they're reflective of what you're moving through in that moment.
Yeah.
And so for me here, a granny square is one, like my grounding thing. Like it was just one of the first things I learned how to do a yarn. It was one of the only things I knew how to do a yarn for a long time. My mama taught me. And so I can see the influence and why I chose something that feels so much like home to me for this space. But then I also specifically did it in a way that reflected how I learned it in the beginning, which I don't always do anymore.
I love that.
I
love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I greatly appreciate that. While you were talking, I was just thinking about just even how I got connected with the Yarn Mission and how much like our friendship and you inviting me to Knit in Circle and you just sending me knitting and crocheting care packages and stuff like that, how much that helped me during a really, really hard time in my life. So I'm super grateful for you. And at some point we definitely need to share. I would love to hear more about, your perspective on radical knitting, and then also just how much I greatly appreciate the Yarn Mission. Everybody, from Knit in Circle and everything, like so grateful.
Thank you. Love it. Love you. Okay. So happy. Here we go.
Okay.
About identity politics and how part of that is using your lived experience to inform your politics and your work. So could you say a little bit about your own lived experience growing up in Chicago, of course? I mean, you talk about this identity, Black queer feminist, but how did that come about in the context of growing up in Chicago? And then we also want to ask you, of course, the other person who grew up in Chicago is President Obama, your assessment of him.
Yes. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago in the Back of the Yards neighborhood. And my parents are the children of Black women who migrated from Mississippi. And so from the way I talk to the way I understand food and so many like ways of being are what has come up with millions of Black people who migrated from the South during the Great Migration, and from the people who stayed, the people who didn't migrate. And so for me, for a very long time, I was clear in my consciousness. Where did your parents come from? Oh, Chicago. But my grandparents migrated from Mississippi. And so for years, I was super conscious of being Black. When I went to college, I went to a predominantly white institution, and I knew about being Black. And obviously, I knew I was a woman. But it was later in college where I was actually introduced to feminism. And I didn't meet my first out Black feminist, Dr. Venus Evans Winters, until I was a senior in college. And so I didn't read Black feminist texts really, at least not knowingly when I was in college. It was through movement that I really came into feminism, and specifically radical Black feminism. I read a lot, but I never feel as well read as other people do. I never feel that way. I feel like I'm behind, and there are entire books that people would, I don't know, burn me at the stake for because I haven't read it. I haven't read them. I don't know that stuff. And so, and then my queerness, right? I think Black people are inherently queer, frankly. I think Black folks are queer in a sense that we're different. We make things different. We're expansive. We don't fit into one simple box, like one single thing. We're super, we have multitudes. We're very diverse. And then you have queer as like a sexual identity, right? A sexual orientation identity. And so for me, as I continue to grow in my own queerness politically, as some people think, and then also when it comes to like how I relate to people, it is political for me. It is a part of my politics. Like, I remember, like I was alive. I wasn't alive, but you know, there was a whole wave when lesbianism was a politic. Like women loving women, or I'm a lesbian because this is my particular politic. And so, you know, I have a partner. She's a woman, and she's also an organizer. And so, like, who we love, how we
We've
love.
also interviewed her on Democracy Now!
Mary Hooks. Mary Hooks from Southerners on New Ground.
Bailing Black mamas out.
Yes, bailing Black mamas out. And so
for Mother's Day.
For Mother's Day.
And of course beyond.
Of course. And so our values are connected to that. Like, I'm not just queer because I happen to be in a relationship with another Black woman, or I've been in relationships. It is about my values. How do I treat the women in my life? How do I treat the trans folk in my life, the gender non-conforming folk, the straight folks in my life? How do I treat children? All those things matter. Like, identity is super important, and how it actually informs how you treat people and how you show up in the world is also important. So,
what about President?
That's like where that the final prompt that I put on the guide kind of comes from. It's just like, how do we channel, right, where we come from and the experiences that we have and who we are, how we see ourselves and how we recognize being seen, into what we do, into how we live. Like, it's wild to me when people are like, oh, well, those things are separate realms. There's nothing is separate. Like that, again, thinking about the conversations we've been having, like, for how long? And then, you know, trying to catch someone up to the fact that, like, no, I can't advocate for a policy and act like that doesn't impact, like, directly my life, other like folks that I care about lives, the generations to come. It's just wild to me. And I feel like that's something that is really loud, and we're able to reflect from our listenings.
You know, I really appreciate the way that Charlene talks about her identity. You know, it's just a very similar story, you know, just related to family, being from the South. You know, my family is from Selma, Alabama, and my mom was the first person to move here to Chicago. And, you know, same thing, the way that I talk, the way that I, you know, experience and see food and see that as a collective experience is very Southern. And queerness, you know, and how that shows up in my work. You know, if you look at just the things that I'm a part of, you know, I have a lot of different interests and don't limit myself because of how other people feel about that, you know. And that's how I show up in, you know, collective spaces, as a support, and, you know, to be resourceful and be a support, you know. And so I really appreciated that clip in a lot of different ways. And, you know, I feel like that matriarchal feminist energy is very much alive and well in the art that I do, especially like one of my recent series, and, you know, just even in the foundation of the work. And so, yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. This was fun. This was fun.
Thanks for sharing this space with me.
This was a lot of fun. We look forward to the next one that is scheduled for the 21st, which is a Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be centering on Miss Major, but I would love to carry over anything that we didn't get to because of the technical difficulty shenanigans.
It'll work nice because we're gonna keep building, right? Everything's connected, so we're gonna be talking about that care work and that community care, and I mean, you don't do it without collective. So I think I'm excited.
Definitely.
Hopefully
This
folks will
was
revisit
great.
it.
This was great. Please definitely, folks, follow Red Animal Wellness and Consulting across different social media platforms. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and then definitely follow the Yarn Mission on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else.
Those are officially, we have a Twitter, but I have not logged in that Twitter for I don't know how long. We might not have a Twitter anymore. I would not try to look for us on Twitter.
Instagram and Facebook is cool beans. Thank you, Layla, for being here. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for helping us with our technical difficulties and adding to the conversation. And yeah, we will see folks on the 21st for that last listening session.
Bye.